In 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a decision so profoundly flawed, so legally indefensible, that historians widely consider it the worst in American history, pushing a divided nation directly to the brink of civil war. This ruling, in the case of Dred Scott v. Sandford, didn't just deny a man his freedom. It attempted to settle the fundamental question of slavery in America, only to shatter the legal landscape and ignite an inferno. Dred Scott, an enslaved man, spent years fighting for his liberty through the courts, arguing his residency in free territories should grant him emancipation. But the Supreme Court's verdict dramatically overreached, declaring that black individuals, enslaved or free, could not be U.S. citizens, and that Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in federal territories. We'll trace how this unprecedented decision unfolded, the arguments presented by both sides, and its immediate, devastating impact. And by the end, you'll see how this single case fundamentally reshaped the legal and moral arguments that led to the deadliest conflict on American soil. In the history of the United States Supreme Court, few decisions have been as universally condemned, or as profoundly impactful, as Dred Scott v. Sandford. Handed down in 1857, this ruling attempted to settle the escalating debate over slavery by denying citizenship to African Americans and asserting that Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in federal territories. It was a legal earthquake, amplifying the fault lines already fracturing a divided nation. The core of this monumental legal battle began with a man named Dred Scott. Born into slavery around 1799 in Virginia, Scott was enslaved by the Peter Blow family. In 1833, after the death of Blow, Scott was sold to Dr. John Emerson, a surgeon in the U.S. Army. What happened next, as Dr. Emerson moved Scott with him across various free territories and states, would form the foundation of Scott's extraordinary bid for freedom. This isn't just a historical footnote. The legal principles debated and decided in Dred Scott, the very definition of citizenship, the limits of federal power, and the recognition of fundamental human rights, continue to resonate in American jurisprudence today. We begin our examination with the journey that first brought Dred Scott to free soil. Despite years living in territories where slavery was legally prohibited, why did Dred Scott find himself still enslaved, setting the stage for a landmark Supreme Court case? Born around 1799, Dred Scott was an enslaved man whose legal battle against his bondage would ultimately redefine American law. His original owner, Dr. John Emerson, a U.S. Army surgeon, moved Scott repeatedly, taking him from Missouri, a slave state, to Illinois, a free state, in 1833. Crucially, Dr. Emerson then moved Scott to the Wisconsin Territory in 1836, where the Missouri Compromise explicitly prohibited slavery. Scott resided in these free jurisdictions for over 4 years. Under the widely recognized legal principle of once free, always free, Scott and his family should have gained their freedom upon entering these non-slavery areas. Following Dr. Emerson's death in 1843, Scott and his wife Harriet initiated their legal fight in 1846, suing Emerson's widow, Irene, for their freedom in Missouri state courts. They initially won their case, but that verdict was later overturned on appeal. The case then took a pivotal turn when Irene Emerson's brother, John F.A. Sandford, a resident of New York, took over management of the estate. This transfer of ownership allowed the case to move to federal court on the grounds of diversity of citizenship, a legal provision allowing disputes between citizens of different states to be heard in federal jurisdiction. This seemingly bureaucratic change would soon unleash a legal storm that extended far beyond a single man's freedom, intertwining with a secret pact that would doom a nation. Yet the most insidious factor in Dred Scott's fate was a clandestine political maneuver, a secret pact that extended beyond the courtroom, orchestrated by the highest levels of government. The political climate in 1857 was already fractured, with tensions between pro-slavery and anti-slavery factions reaching a dangerous peak, particularly after the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise and allowed for popular sovereignty on slavery in new territories. Into this volatile environment stepped President-elect James Buchanan. Concerned that the nation was teetering on the brink of disunion, Buchanan privately corresponded with Supreme Court justices, notably Justice John Catron of Tennessee and Justice Robert Grier of Pennsylvania. His goal was unambiguous: to secure a sweeping Supreme Court decision that would definitively settle the slavery question, hoping it would prevent civil war. Initially, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney had intended a narrower ruling, focusing only on Dred Scott standing to sue in federal court. However, Buchanan's lobbying, coupled with internal dissent among the justices, including a desire to present a united front, pushed Taney towards a much broader, more impactful decision. A key element of this strategy was what became known as the Pennsylvania Fix. Buchanan personally persuaded Justice Grier, a Northerner, to join the Southern majority. This ensured the final decision wouldn't appear to be merely a sectional 5-4 split, but rather a more authoritative 7-2, with two Northern justices ostensibly supporting the outcome. This calculated move was designed to give the ruling more national legitimacy, though it ultimately failed. But the court's ambition didn't stop at political maneuvering. It proceeded to construct a legal framework based on arguments that critics quickly dissected, claiming they were built upon three fundamental legal misinterpretations. Chief Justice Roger B. Taney's opinion, delivered on March 6, 1857, just 2 days after President James Buchanan's inauguration, wasn't just a legal pronouncement. It was a deliberate attempt to settle the slavery question through three fundamental misinterpretations of American law. The first, and perhaps most dehumanizing, was Taney's assertion regarding African American citizenship. He declared that African Americans, whether enslaved or free, were not and could not be citizens of the United States. In his infamous words, they had no rights which the white man was bound to respect, thus denying Dred Scott and all African Americans standing to sue in federal court. Secondly, Taney addressed the question of Scott's freedom gained through residency. Despite Scott's extended residence in free territories, like Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory, Taney ruled that his status as an enslaved person remained tied to his owner, regardless of geographical location. This effectively nullified the legal concept of once free, always free in territories where slavery was prohibited. Finally, and most radically, Taney declared the 1820 Missouri Compromise unconstitutional. He argued that Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in federal territories, claiming such prohibitions violated slaveholders' Fifth Amendment property rights without due process. This decision was met with immediate and profound backlash. While celebrated in the South as a vindication of states' rights and property interests, it ignited outrage across the North, further intensifying abolitionist fervor and deepening the sectional divide that would soon lead to unimaginable conflict. What if a legal decision, intended to settle a national division, instead became the spark that ignited a war? The Dred Scott decision, far from resolving the contentious issue of slavery, effectively invalidated the delicate political compromises that had maintained peace for decades, fueling what many historians refer to as the irrepressible conflict. By declaring Congress powerless to restrict slavery in federal territories, the Supreme Court directly undermined the core platform of the nascent Republican Party and its Free Soil movement, which advocated for preventing the expansion of slavery. This ruling, according to many abolitionists, strengthened their resolve to resist. Abraham Lincoln, then a rising political figure, fiercely denounced the decision. In his famous June 26, 1857, speech in Springfield, Illinois, Lincoln argued that the ruling was part of a broader conspiracy to nationalize slavery, becoming a central theme in his celebrated debates with Senator Stephen Douglas. This demonstrated the Supreme Court's aggressive intervention in political questions, eroding public trust and setting a dangerous precedent for judicial overreach. Ironically, while the decision was meant to entrench slavery permanently, it paradoxically strengthened the resolve of those who fought to abolish it, ultimately leading to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments that directly overturned its core tenets. The unseen victory. What really happened to Dred Scott? Yet what truly happened to Dred Scott himself after this devastating ruling? Despite the Supreme Court's decision, Dred Scott and his family were not returned to permanent enslavement. In a remarkable twist of fate, Irene Emerson, Scott's owner at the time of the Supreme Court decision, had remarried. Her new husband was Calvin Chaffee, an abolitionist congressman from Massachusetts, who, upon learning of the situation, immediately facilitated their freedom. Chaffee transferred ownership of Dred, Harriet, and their daughters, Eliza and Lizzie, to Taylor Blow, the son of Scott's original owner, Peter Blow, who then officially manumitted them on May 26, 1857, less than 3 months after the Supreme Court decision. Though free, Dred Scott tragically lived for only a short time, succumbing to tuberculosis on September 17, 1858, barely a year after his manumission and before the outbreak of the Civil War. His daughters, however, lived long, free lives, their descendants carrying forward the promise of citizenship that the Supreme Court had initially denied. The ultimate irony remains. A decision meant to cement slavery and prevent conflict instead ignited a war that abolished the very institution it sought to protect, making Dred Scott a legal nullity and a profound moral stain on American jurisprudence. Upon learning of the situation, immediately transferred ownership of the Scott family to the Blow family of St. Louis, the original enslavers who had initiated the lawsuit by loaning money for Scott's legal fees. On May 26, 1857, less than 3 months after the Supreme Court's monumental ruling, Dred Scott, his wife Harriet, and their daughters were formally emancipated. The Dred Scott decision stands as a profound historical irony. Intended by Chief Justice Taney to definitively settle the question of slavery, it achieved the exact opposite, serving as a catalyst for the escalating sectional tensions that precipitated the American Civil War. In a cruel twist of historical fate, the very war it helped ignite ultimately led to the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, constitutional provisions that directly repudiated every premise of the Dred Scott ruling, enshrining citizenship, due process, and voting rights for African Americans. This case remains a stark reminder of how a judicial pronouncement, intended to provide stability, can instead unravel the legal and social fabric of a nation. Considering how profoundly the Dred Scott decision shaped the course of American history, what other landmark legal cases do you believe had unintended, far-reaching consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this careful legal analysis valuable, subscribe for more deep dives into pivotal moments in legal history. And for another look at how Supreme Court decisions can reshape society, watch my breakdown of Plessy v. Ferguson next. This video presents publicly documented information. It is for educational purposes, not legal advice.